The National, followed by The Journal, next on CBC Television.
Preserving the Fraser River estuary, tomorrow at 6 from the News Center.
Tuesday, May 31st. Tonight on The National, stepping out, Reagan and Gorbachev stroll through Red Square. Daycare delay. Ottawa discovers its program may cost a lot more than it thought. And on The Journal, the great communicator. Reagan sells democracy American style to the next generation of Soviet leaders. Tonight, two students who caught his act. The National with Peter Mansbridge.
Good evening. It was another amazing day in Moscow, filled with images of change and optimism. Ronald Reagan walking under the Kremlin wall, his arm around Mikhail Gorbachev, a gesture of friendship almost unthinkable until now. And there were other dramatic signs of the improved relations between the superpowers as the summit continues. Hints that a major arms treaty may be possible before Reagan leaves office. And the President of the United States answering questions about American life at Moscow University. We have two reports. The first, Joe Schlesinger.
There was Ronald Reagan standing before a mural of the Russian Revolution with Lenin gazing down on him. But Reagan hadn't come to Moscow University to knock communism. Instead, he set out to sell the Soviet students on the virtues of American democracy.
Go to any American town, to take just an example, and you'll see dozens of churches representing many different beliefs. Go into any union hall where the members know their right to strike is protected by law.
It was vintage Reagan. He compared the precariousness of the perestroika reforms with the dangers faced by Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid when they were trapped between a posse and a cliff. And then he added reassuringly,
by the way, both Butch and Sundance made it.
The students seemed to lap it up, even if sometimes they were puzzled. This law student wanted to know about the proliferation of guns and drugs in the United States.
Как вы считаете, это проблемы неизбежные издержки демократии?
Do you believe, he asked, that these problems are unavoidable in a democracy?
No.
Throughout, Reagan was supportive of Mikhail Gorbachev. The fact that some people couldn't emigrate from the Soviet Union, he said, wasn't necessarily the Soviet leaders' fault.
I'm blaming bureaucracy. We have the same type of thing happen in our own country, and every once in a while somebody has to get the bureaucracy by the neck and shake it loose.
Part of the reason for the changed tone, Reagan has been discussing perestroika with Gorbachev. This morning, the two men went into overtime while Gorbachev explained his reforms. As for the main issue here, a treaty to cut strategic nuclear missiles, Gorbachev was optimistic.
And I'm sure that if the president makes good use of the time that we have remaining, I'm sure that we will be able to prepare the treaty.
In the meantime, though, the two sides had to satisfy themselves with signing a whole raft of minor agreements ranging from notification of missile launchings to cultural exchanges. The big one still eludes them. But there were hints.
Generally speaking, it's in the fall that we collect the harvest.
That would mean a fifth Reagan-Gorbachev summit this fall. But for all the warming up of Ronald Reagan to the world's chief communist, he gives no sign of being ready to drop the main obstacle to such a treaty, his Star Wars plan. Joe Schlesinger, CBC News, Moscow.
After negotiations ended for the day, Ronald Reagan managed to get in a little sightseeing. Like most tourists in Moscow, he went for a walk around Red Square, but he may be the only one who's ever had Mikhail Gorbachev for a tour guide. As Gorbachev pointed out the monuments and the cathedrals, Reagan said it was all wonderful. Don Murray reports.
Господин президент Reagan.
Well, how do you do?
Ronald Reagan on Red Square with Mikhail Gorbachev doing the introductions. History will record it, but how? A socialist stroll? Presidential perestroika? Certainly a surprise, but a happy surprise for Muscovite tourists. One promptly seized the occasion to urge important results at the summit. and Gorbachev didn't miss a beat.
Sir, you should apply some pressure on the president. You are always pressuring me to give you results.
Wonderful, magnificent, even more spectacular than I'd been told, Reagan murmured as Gorbachev pointed out the landmarks, including the mausoleum where Lenin lies embalmed. The man who'd spent a political career denouncing Lenin's legacy now was asked the inevitable question.
Do you still think you're in an evil empire, Mr. President? No. Why not?
Are you happy? Are you pleased with our answer?
I was talking about another time, another era.
But in this era, two highly media-conscious politicians saw a toddler, and Gorbachev got him first. Come and meet Grandfather Reagan, he said. Do you recognize the president?
Do you recognize President Reagan?
Just a little time off, Reagan called the walkabout. But with the cameras rolling and the world watching, this was symmetry in the streets, and Gorbachev grabbed the initiative. Why not a joint space probe to Mars, he publicly prodded Reagan.
We have our scientists. I'm not a scientist. We have our space people looking at that right now.
The president is a cautious man, Gorbachev laughed. And so on they went with this remarkable political promenade. And then the well-placed jab, aimed with a most disarming smile.
We are now in our own country so self-critical that even the president's criticism sounds rather weak because we know our own problems. And I said to the president that sometimes America is not self-critical enough. That's not my invention. I think that's indeed so.
But before things get too far out of hand, why we find ourselves standing like this.
As the walkabout drew to a close, Reagan chose to deliver his message of avuncular harmony.
What we've decided to do is talk to each other instead of about each other.
With that, Reagan set off to meet Soviet artists and intellectuals. And Gorbachev strolled back to his Kremlin office, clearly pleased with his performance in the superpower media duet, and quite happy to provide a small solo encore. I told Reagan, he said, that was my secret weapon. Don Murray, CBC News, Moscow.
Tomorrow morning, Reagan and Gorbachev hold their last official meeting at the Kremlin. Later, a special evening for the two leaders and their wives at the Bolshoi Theater. And in between those events, Reagan and Gorbachev will each hold news conferences separately. Gorbachev has often met with the media on his trips abroad, but it's believed that he'll now be the first Soviet leader ever to hold a news conference inside the Soviet Union.
Coming up on The Journal.
The summit goes to school. Reagan's message to the students of Moscow.
We Americans make no secret of our belief in freedom. In fact, it's something of a national pastime.
Tonight, two students who were there.
I concluded that he's charming.
He didn't give any good answer.
From the halls of learning to the streets of the city, summit fever grips Moscow. Tonight on The Journal.